Hey everyone, I've always loved Eldar, and when the new aspects came out, I knew that I wanted to paint them, and I wanted to try and get a really good army standard, which was nice and simple. My problem with Eldar though is, when I was younger, the studio paint jobs for the Eldar and the paint jobs that you'd see from like Tim Prow and Mike McVeigh were so crisp and so clean, and it was such an intimidating thing to try to reproduce. And I was just never good enough. So I'd never done an Eldar army for that reason. And as I became better at painting, the standard and the finish of paint jobs got a lot higher. And as I became more experienced and understood how the Heavy Metal team created their paint jobs, especially the more recent style of Heavy Metal paint jobs, I came to realize just how reachable they are, but how time consuming it is to create paint jobs of that standard to the box art level. So with that in mind, I wanted to do a video where we had a little bit of a middle ground, where we're going for the box art style Heavy Metal GW paint job, but we're not spending a huge amount of time doing it, and also don't necessarily need a huge amount of skill to do. Now, I know that all sounds a bit counterintuitive, but I think we've got a result that works quite well, and the result you get is going to be dependent on the amount of time you spend on them. And in this video, hopefully that's what we're achieving. With these goals in mind, we need to talk about the paint consistency and what we're going to be working with throughout this whole video. This is Games Workshop Trollslayer Orange, and I'm going to thin it down to a glaze consistency of paint. Paint is super thin. We're going to remove the excess paint off of our brush. So when we do a brush stroke, what's going to happen is we're going to see virtually no paint come off of the brush and onto the model. You can see there's not a lot of difference on that palette. What we're going to do is we're going to use the side of the brush, and we're going to push this paint into the areas that we want the deepest. We're going to try and create a slight gradient across the yellow of the head. So we're obviously doing the helmet first. The helmet is base coated in Games Workshop Yriel Yellow. We could take in Games Workshop Trollslayer Orange. We're thinning it down to that glaze consistency of paint. As an estimate, it's probably 8 parts water to 1 part paint. But the goal is when you paint this onto the model, virtually no paint should come off. You're looking to build up 6 or 7 layers of paint, pushing your brush stroke into the areas that you want the deepest. And what's going to happen is that paint is going to build up, and you'll gradually get a nice gradient, which is what Games Workshop get. And I know this looks like it could be time consuming, but in total this helmet took me about 5 minutes to do both sides, to be honest with you. And if you're batch painting 10 of these helmets or 5 of these helmets, it's going to make it drastically quicker. And the goal, remember, Eldar armor is very flat. There's not a huge amount of interest to it, especially on the helmets. So we're just trying to create a gradient, right? Because it makes it more visually interesting. It doesn't have to be a masterpiece. My suggestion would be is if you're concerned about this, it's better to go too thin and do more and more layers of paint rather than making your paint thicker and doing less layers. If your paint is thicker and you do less layers, there's more chance of having transitional lines, which can look very messy. And I'm going to show you how to fix those in a second, but it's better to go thinner and do more layers than it is to go thicker and rush it. And as I said, this becomes really efficient. First of all, if you're going to do an entire army like this, you'll be very good at this in the end, and you'll be able to do it very, very quickly. And also, if you're doing 5-10 helmets, you get the muscle memory, and it happens like everything just speeds up anyway. Now on the side of the helmet at the moment, as I rotate it, you're going to see like there's a tide mark going across the helmet. There's like a coffee stain. You can see the hard line. That's because I haven't been careful enough. To get rid of that at this point, all I'm going to do is I'm going to wet my brush, remove some of the water so it's nice and moist, and then I'm just going to run the brush along that line, and it will basically delete it. Just be gentle with it. Now the gradients are there purely to add some visual interest to the flat panels of the Eldar. What we have to do is we have to edge highlight this. And this is where some people can really struggle, and I get it. This is Games Workshop Yriel Yellow on the palette. And what you're looking to do is you're looking to break the surface tension of this paint. You can see as I'm playing with this paint, what happens is the paint tries to stay attached to the brush. It's almost like sticky. We have to break that surface tension. So what we're looking to do for the ideal paint consistency is we're looking to add enough water for that surface tension to be broken, right? No more. And when we load our brush, what we want to do is we want to load our brush no more than halfway up the brush. You can see I've mainly got the tip at the moment, but you don't want to load the brush any more than halfway, and you want to remove the excess so the brush is not overloaded. When you're doing this edge highlight, my recommendation would be to use closer towards the tip of the brush and the side of the brush. The reason why I say that part's not a requirement, but if you use closer towards the tip, that is a narrower part of your brush and you're less likely to get thicker lines. This would be my recommendation. Paint consistency is huge. If your paint is too thin, it's going to flow everywhere and you're not going to get a nice crisp line. If your paint consistency is too thick, what's going to happen is the paint's not going to want to come off the brush properly and you're going to get a broken, rough, chalky line. So remember, when we're trying to create that perfect paint consistency for edge highlighting, and I will have a full video on YouTube for edge highlighting in the next few weeks because I've had quite a few requests for it. But when you want your perfect paint consistency, all you need to do is add enough water to break that surface tension of the paint. The descriptions of too thin coats and skimmed milk unfortunately don't cut it because every paint behaves differently. Some need more water, some need different consistencies. It just doesn't work. So try and break the surface tension for this. If you have problems with your brush control, as in getting nice crisp lines, like I get it, it takes practice, but some people have shaky hands. Try and exhale as you do your brush stroke, and what it will do is it will settle your hands. Now, edge highlighting is actually the most time consuming part of painting Eldar. And the reason why it's so important is the number one priority, the number one goal when miniature painting before anything else is we have to create readability. We have to be able to see which shapes are clearly separated from arm's length. So edge highlights help us do this as well as recess lines. Now, I appreciate contrast is also something that people talk about a lot, and that's absolutely correct, but we use contrast to enhance readability. So readability comes first. So whether you like edge highlights or not, it's good to have a level of them. And you need to decide what level of edge highlight. You can have very subtle edge highlights like we have at the moment, which is a sort of thing that I would normally go for. I'm not a big fan of like extreme Tron style highlights, or you can push it a little bit further and get something a little bit more like the old school traditional Games Workshop paint job. It's entirely up to you. But what I will say is your edge highlights always want to be nice and crisp as possible. You do not want thick edge highlights for any reason. Regardless of the logic behind it, it always looks messy. Next up, we're going to highlight this again. Now, I'm using Games Workshop Yriel Yellow, and I'm just adding white. Same consistency as before because we're going for an edge highlight. If you don't want to mix your paints, something like this, Vallejo model color lemon yellow or Vallejo model color ice yellow is exactly the same as what I've mixed. So you can just buy something like that. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to add a second gradient. We're going to add a second value of an edge highlight. So we're going to have our Yriel Yellow edge highlights, which were previous, and now we're pushing up to this white yellow mix. And the reason for this is from a tabletop perspective, although again, like I'm not a fan of Tron style highlighting, the truth is from a tabletop perspective, if this is going to be an army, it's actually quite powerful to have edge highlights that are a little bit over the top. They don't need to be extreme, but if they're a little bit over the top, they stand out more. And remember, the battle from a tabletop perspective is you want your, and this is also the truth for display, but this is a tabletop video, you want your armies to look good from arm's length. You want them to look good from the other side of the table. So it's almost worth pushing a little bit more of an extreme when it comes to army painting. Even if you're going for a higher quality, this would still really be relevant because you want that striking, impactful result. Like most people are not going to look at your models up close. They don't even need to be painted to an extremely high quality. Like if they're striking, the army will look amazing. Now I know I've skipped ahead a little bit in the sense of I've painted the faceplate black and I've painted the eye lenses. I'm not going over that in this video because the eye lenses, I'm going to do a separate video on eye lenses because it's quite a big subject. And I don't want to make this video any longer. So I haven't done anything else to the yellow. I just, as I said, painted the faceplate black and painted the lenses blue. So ignore those. And this is basically what we've got. So ice yellow or lemon yellow, or just add a little bit of white to Yriel Yellow. It's not going to make any difference. Make the edge highlights pop. The thing with the edge highlights, when we're doing the second value, the second level of brightness for the edge highlights, I'm not highlighting every single edge. I'm highlighting the edges where it's facing the light. So we're still leaving some of the Yriel Yellow, and then we're just going over the orbs and making them pop. So again, like, it's this idea of depth. When we did the flat of the panels and we glazed in the orange, we did that to add interest to the flat panels. When we've got two different highlights for the edge highlights, we're also adding interest to the edge highlights. So it's just not one color. Now the orange armor itself is going to be Games Workshop Trollslayer Orange. And to shade that, we're going to be using Games Workshop Khorne Red. We're going to thin it down to a glazed consistency of paint, just like we did with the orange over the yellow helmet. So super thin paint until it's basically transparent when you test your brush stroke. So remember, load your brush up, remove the excess, test it. You want less paint. Now, what we're going to do here, the difference is, bearing in mind, part of the goal for this video is also about speed, right? Eldar are hard to paint. It can be quite time consuming. We don't want to spend 5 hours per model, or at least that's not what the goal is on this video. Again, we're going to have some high quality Eldar videos, like display standard Eldar videos coming up. So feel free to keep an eye on the channel. But the point of this is we want to speed things up wherever possible. And the orange armor is the perfect time to do that. I'm afraid to say it is shameless plug time. As you guys know, I'm really trying to grow the channel, and I'm trying to give you guys as good quality content as possible. So if you do want to support, please, at this point, press pause, go and hit the like button, leave a comment below. It makes a massive difference to the algorithm and means a huge amount to me. So I really appreciate it. If you do want to support a little bit further, feel free to check out the members area to gain access to even more in-depth video content. Get in contact for commissions. Thank you, as always, for everyone that's watching so far. And the reason why we can do this with the orange is very simply because the orange is not the important part of the model. First of all, the whole torso is covered by the gun, and the lower legs, no one really looks at the legs, or not as a matter of priority. So if you're going to spend time on this model, focus on the head, get the helmets working, looking as good as possible, and then the armor you can potentially skimp some time on because there's not so much of a priority. When you meet people, when you talk to people, you always look at their faces. And this is no different with models. If you're going to have a budget on the amount of time that you want to spend per model, which, let's be perfectly honest, most people do, in my opinion, when it comes to their armies, because they want to actually get game in, you can sacrifice an element of quality and therefore time on the armor itself and just spend more time on the helmet. But anyway, with the Khorne Red, we've got that glazed consistency of paint, and the goal with this is we are focusing on the overall shape. So you can see the entire left-hand side of that leg, the entire inside half of that leg is being glazed to Khorne Red. Remember, this idea of a gradient adds interest to the panels, adds interest to the actual model itself. So the whole of the left-hand side has gone slightly darker with the Khorne Red. And then on the individual panels, I've glazed towards the bottom of those panels. Same with the torso. The torso is just one big cylindrical shape. So we're leaving the ab muscles, and what we're going to do is we're going to glaze that Khorne Red towards the outside of the model, towards the sides, same as the chest itself. What we're going to do is, as you get around to the side of that chest, towards under the arms, we're just doing a little bit of a glaze, and we're pushing those areas of the model towards the Khorne Red. We don't have a huge amount of contrast here. We're just creating a gradient. We're creating visual interest. Don't need to go extreme bright, don't need to go extreme dark. But you can see, and if you compare it to the left leg, which I haven't painted yet, this makes a huge difference to how interesting this armor looks. You should also do a bit of a recess wash on this. The Khorne Red will flow into the recesses just to basically define those shapes. It will make it look nice, especially around the abs and especially around like the actual armor panels that are on the legs and the chest. Now, one thing that you'll notice is I'm not doing any of this glazing up to a highlight. I'm only ever glazing the shadows. The reason for this is I'm starting as bright as possible. So on the armor, Trollslayer Orange, on the helmet, Yriel Yellow, and I'm never going brighter than those two colors. I'm only going darker. And the reason for this is because of efficiency. When you're glazing in dark colors, it's very easy to push your brush towards the shadow recess, right? So any leftover paint on your brush is just going to end up puddling in the recess where you end your brush stroke. And the problem with doing that with the highlight is when you glaze in the highlight, your highlight ends up in the middle of a panel. So what you end up doing is if you glaze in a brighter orange or a brighter yellow, you've got to manage this big area of armor where you're going to leave big significant chunks of paint. And although you can do that from a time perspective, from an efficiency perspective, that is a lot more work. So this is why on these ones with an army project, I'm starting my base coat as bright as possible, and then I'm just going darker and darker because it's much easier to manage. Now, when it comes to obviously readability is everything, right? So what we're going to do, same for the edge highlights, we're going back to the Trollslayer Orange, and we're going for the same consistency as we had with the Games Workshop Yriel Yellow on the helmet. We're looking to break the surface tension of the paint so it's not too thin or not too thick. If it's too thin, it's going to flow around and you're not going to have enough control. If it's too thick, the brush stroke is going to be very rough and it's not going to want to come off onto the edges. And all we're going to do, we're doing 2 sets of edge highlights on this. We're going to go into all of the edges with Trollslayer Orange. And honestly, the Trollslayer Orange is only going to stand out on the dark areas where you've pushed the Games Workshop Khorne Red. So you don't really need to edge highlight the bright side with the Trollslayer Orange because it's just not going to stand out. But you might want to take the opportunity to potentially clean up anything that's maybe got a little bit messy as you've done this. The choice is entirely yours, but it just means that you create some readability and frame and some cleanliness to the darker areas of this model, because again, like, we don't want to go too extreme dark because we want this to stand out on the tabletop. So it's just like, this is very much like what we would prioritize for a nice army where time is a budget, right? Where you don't have a huge amount of time to spend on it. And once you've got all of those shapes put into place, the armor is going to start looking better straight away. You can already see the right leg starting to look good. Keep pushing until you're happy with them. And then what you're going to do next is you're going to move up to a brighter color. Now, in my case, all I'm doing, I added a tiny little bit of white, words are hard, to the Trollslayer Orange. If you don't want to mix those colors, just get some Games Workshop Firedragon Bright. It will do exactly the same thing. So Games Workshop Firedragon Bright, and on the bright side, so where we've got all the Trollslayer Orange panels, not where we put the Khorne Red, we're now going to highlight the bright side of it with Games Workshop Trollslayer Orange. Now the truth is, I love Eldar models, and I really don't want to criticize Games Workshop here because I don't know the understanding. I don't understand how they make models or anything like that. But when it comes to the armor panels on Eldar, they're not always sharp lines. They're not always sharp edges. So where we use the side of the brush on these abs to get a nice clean line, that's nice and easy because the edge is very sharp. But not every armor panel has that luxury. So what you've effectively got to do is you've got to freehand that line on some of these armor panels, like the thigh plate, shin, the armor plate that goes around the lower calf. Like, that's not a sharp edge. So same as with the armor panels that are actually on the breast where the gem is, those are not sharp lines. This is where this paint style becomes far more challenging, to be honest with you, because what you're effectively going to do, you're not going to have the luxury of what I'm doing here and using the side of the brush on the abs. You're going to have to paint those lines on nice and cleanly. And I've got a few tips for that, but it really does come down to practice. And you can see as I start working on these plates on the chest, these don't have sharp lines. So I've got to paint them on with the tip of the brush. This is challenging, I'm not going to lie. My suggestion would be is as you do the brush stroke, exhale as you do your brush stroke. It will settle your hands. and you'll get a nicer stroke. The other option is you always want to be pulling your brush towards your wrist. So when you do your brush stroke, you want the model to be in a position where you can pull the brush in the direction of your wrists. You don't want a side to side motion, because what happens is you end up losing control. You end up missing a certain element of control, and your brush marks will be very, very messy. Now, it's worth pointing out these edge highlights don't have to be perfect. Like, genuinely, they haven't got to be spot on. They've just got to kind of be, they've just got to kind of look a little bit neat. Now, what I will say with the amount of edge highlights, it's up to you how far you go. If I was doing this for my own army, I would have stopped right there. But I wanted to show you everything when it comes to the YouTube video. So previously, with the Trollslayer Orange and the Firedragon Bright, I've basically edge highlighted every edge. This is really important to create the readability. Now what I've got here is, this is the this is the Vallejo model color Ice Yellow. And the edges that are prominent, that are facing the light, I'm making these pop even more, going even brighter with them. And as I said, this is entirely optional if you want it to pop more. I personally wouldn't, because I like the more subtle look. I think it looks nicer without them, but I know a lot of people like this sort of extreme Tron style finish, so I thought I'd show it off nonetheless. It doesn't look bad. It's just a little bit more work for a start. You've obviously got to do more work because it's more edge highlights. That adds time. One of the goals of this video is to not spend a huge amount of time on these models. So there's definitely that. And it's entirely up to you. Like I said, we're looking for just basically the edges that are facing upwards, or the ones that are like at the corners of an edge, like the corner of a shoulder pad or something like that. So your choice on whether you go this far with it. I don't think it looks bad. It's just not my sort of thing. I prefer something a little bit more subtle. And that's it for how we painted the Fire Dragons. I'm actually really happy with the result, considering the amount of time that we spent on this. So hope you found the video helpful. Hope you enjoyed it. As I said, please make sure you hit the like button and let me know what you think in the comments below. It makes a huge difference to the growth of the channel. So thank you for that. I know I've got a few people asking for videos on how to paint the gems and how to paint eye lenses. I'm making those at the moment, so keep an eye on the channel. They will be coming, and I've also got a few more Aeldari videos coming up, higher quality ones, and also variations on the color schemes as well. So thank you as always. I really appreciate everyone. Cheers.